So yeah, let's kick this thing off.
All right, welcome to my first Substack Live. I'm joined by Arshy Mann and Jordan Cornish from the Hatchet, which is a really great newsletter and podcast that you should all subscribe to if you haven't yet. Though I don't know what proportion of Hatchet versus Orchard subscribers are tuning in. So if you don't know me, I host a newsletter and podcast as well called The Orchard. But Archie and Jordan, tell me a bit about what you've been up to lately at the Hatchet before we, get into our discussion.
Well, I mean, we've been pretty busy, obviously, I think, with the election, with the tariff threats and the threats of American annexation, everything around that. There's just been more kind of news than anybody can handle. So Jordan and I have been basically, in a lot of ways, just kind of responding to the events of the day. And but this week, we're excited to be able to put out something a little bit more substantive. So we've been working on a series about Brookfield, which is the company that Mark Carney used to work for in between his time as the governor of the Bank of England and the prime minister. It's been in the election a whole bunch. Conservatives and NDP have kind of railed against him. Mark Carney has been on the defensive quite a bit. But I don't think the average Canadian really knows that much about Brookfield, even though it is basically the largest company in Canada and one of the most important players going back more than a century. I know Jordan's been actually kind of pushing us, even when we were at Commons, to kind of like do something on this company for years, and so now it's we're kind of ready to do that. I don't know, Jordan. What do you, yeah? I think it's gonna be pretty good. I'm pretty excited for that.
Yeah, I'm super excited about it. I mean, I think you did a really good job kind of explaining everything that we've been up to. I think most people who do this kind of work right now can understand it's been a busy time. Lots to talk about, lots to discuss, and we've been trying to be as in the mix on it as we can. But I am really looking forward to this little series that we're going to put out because, as you mentioned, I've been thinking about it for a long time, and Brookfield is fascinating. It's got a really amazing history. I don't know how well known it is. I mean, a lot of it was really illuminating for me. So I'm really excited to get it out there. We had some great interviews, really strong guests. It's gonna be fun.
Yeah,
Is it? Are you pro or anti Brookfield?
I'm not. I mean, neither, right? I mean, we're
Yeah.
more interested in what it is, what it says about the economy, the state of kind of Canadian, the Canadian corporate world. I mean, it goes back, like we said, all the way, to the turn of the last century as a kind of pseudo colonial enterprise in Brazil, built off of kind of Gilded Age railway money. And it intersects with some of Canada's, biggest, richest families, specifically the Bronfmans, who were heavily involved throughout the '80s and '90s, and they were kind of seen as the corporate raiders of the time. And ever since then, they've kind of rebranded to be like the safest, most boring company in the world, the place where all of your hard-earned pension money goes. And yet, there's, I think, a lot of people with pretty big questions, not only about how they do business, whether or not they're as stable as they might appear at first glance, and of course, how they affect everyday people as well, especially through their role as kind of a giant financialized corporate landlord. So, we're going to be hitting all of those kinds of different topics. I'm really excited for it.
Yeah, and I mean that is very timely and relevant, including to the conversation that we're gonna have. You recently released an episode on the sort of conservative campaign and how it's been pretty stagnant. I mean, the conservatives are doing by any measure, well, almost any measure, pretty well in the polls. I mean,
Yeah,
they're
they're doing
averaging.
great by every measure except the one that counts. Like, I mean,
uh,
Polyev might outperform Stephen Harper in 2011, right? And still might lose this election campaign, largely because the NDP is not doing good.
Yeah, I mean, it's too bad. Someone should have promised to make, one of the previous elections, the last election under first past the post. And
Who could
my,
have thought of such an idea?
yeah, I know
But
it's
again, it's working out great for the liberals, right? I mean, this bet
As it
on
often
keep
does.
exactly right. Like I don't think Trudeau made an incorrect bet if you look at it from the perspective of the Liberal Party of Canada. They've done very, very well under first past the post, the most successful political party in the West of the 20th century, all that stuff. And why would they want to screw with that?
Mhm. Yeah, and that's why I knew from the outset. I was like, this is a cynical gambit
Yeah.
for Trudeau to vault from third to first,
Mhm.
and um, you know, long history of liberal cynicism, and always at voting time, it's like, hey, if you don't like the Conservatives, vote for us,
Mhm.
right? Because we're the only people who can win. And in this election, it is more true, I think, than in any other election in certainly in my adult life. I mean, I guess you go back to 1993 when the NDP was nearly wiped out, not as bad as the PCs, which overshadowed that. And you're looking at the polls, and again, Polyev is consistently in the high 30s. Carney is somewhere in the 40s.
Mhm.
And then you have the NDP less than 10% in most polls I've seen. Um, and it's, a really, I think if the NDP is wiped out, for me, that wouldn't be a good development. Not out of partisan loyalty. I mean, I'm critical of all the parties, as I know both of you are. But just in terms of the range of debate in Canadian politics, um, narrowing, and of course the NDP have contributed to that. And so I guess I wanted to sort of start this conversation about the future of the NDP, or if there is one, with what happened. Going from 2011 when they were um, became official opposition for the first time. They got 30% of the vote, to 2015 when they finished, I think, with 20%, but it was still strong third place finish, to now where we're talking about it's looking like single digit seats.
Jordan, do you want to go
Yeah, I feel
first,
like
or should
we.
I jump in?
I mean,
Yep.
I feel like between the three of us, we could like come up with like a pretty good podcast segment around just like the NDP making the wrong calls or having bad timing. Like that, I feel like is such a through line of these people since Jagmeet came into the leadership or since 2017. But like even you can go back further than that. Like even kind of putting Mulcair kind of into the leadership position as kind of this like sensible centrist figure at a time when there was like a real appetite for a progressive styled leader like Trudeau. Like that was kind of like one thing where it kind of felt like they were we kind of misread the moment, and then they found their own sort of young progressive guy, and that was right when people I think were getting a little bit more sick of Trudeau and that shtick. And then they propped up the Liberals for years, which has come back to bite them now. I think is a fair way of putting it, or is at least something that I'm sure they might have some regrets about how. I mean, not pulling the plug on that government a little bit sooner and seeing what would have happened, as opposed to losing all the all the ground that they had at a certain time. And there's other stuff there too that I think about when it comes to them. Like the NDP has a lot of roots and sort of like being worried about the threat of Americans. Like that was something that was kind of central, or not central, but like was a part of their DNA at a point. And right now, like the Liberals really get to eat their lunch on that. So maybe it's a bit of reaping what they sowed here. I think that's a bit of like a truncated misstep kind of timeline, but those are certainly the ones that stood out to me, especially as I'm just kind of thinking through the legacy of this era of the NDP as we kind of watch it wind down.
Yeah, I think those are all great points, Jordan. And the way I've been thinking about it, is, what's gone wrong specifically right now, and then what's gone wrong kind of in the longer term. I will say, I think right now, I don't think it would have mattered who the NDP leader was at this moment. This is the clearest kind of red pill, blue pill, red door, blue door election in a very, very long time. And you can see that that's the case because all the other parties have kind of dropped off the map. It's not just the NDP that are doing quite poorly. The Bloc Québécois are also kind of bottoming out. I mean, their numbers are stronger in Quebec, but they also face the threat of being almost entirely wiped out. The Greens are a non-entity. Even the PPC are basically, had been gaining a tiny bit of momentum here or there, but I think most potential PPC voters are going very much with Polyev at this point. And so you have a kind of this kind of American style election kind of coming up right now. But I do think that also it that shouldn't distract from some of the longer term issues of the NDP. I think the 2011 moment might have been one of the worst things that could have happened to them. I really do think they took a lot of the wrong lessons from it. Like so much of it was just luck. Jack Layton having built up an actual uh, coming off like a human being. Michael Ignatieff being incredibly weak in that election, and Quebec has a tendency to just vote for that guy, whoever that guy of the moment is. You can see that even right now with everybody kind of coalescing in Quebec very strongly behind Mark Carney.
Whose
And
French
yet
is
I
very
think
poor.
his French is incredibly poor, right? Like Leighton at least, grew up as an Anglo Montrealer and so, had a way of speaking French that I think appealed to a lot of people. But I think the NDP took Jack Layton's kind of moves towards the center, and basically thought that was what would propel them to victory. And they almost got there. They really did. If the election had been 1 month in 2015 instead of 2 months, we might still have Prime Minister Tom Mulcair, right? Like he went into that election leading in the polls, which is amazing. Again, I do think so much of that had to do with the Alberta NDP's victory earlier that year and that kind of giving momentum to Mulcair. But, the NDP right now seems like a party without a purpose. I think so much of what they have focused on, over in my lifetime at least, has basically been building up the social safety net to the exclusion of almost every other issue. This is not a social safety net election. This is an economy election. What contributions does the NDP have on economics? And I'm not saying that I'm not trying to frame that as a kind of they should be more business friendly. I actually think it's quite the opposite. I think they do not have a serious commitment to a kind of left economics. They haven't thought about these things. Certainly, Jagmeet Singh has not thought about these things. Um, you know, he is not a particularly economically ideological leader. In the first interview I ever did with him, I did a profile of him for Canadian Lawyer magazine when he was at Queen's Park, very, very long time ago, before he was on the national stage. And I remember asking him about, his kind of political beliefs. And for the most part, he focused on issues of racial and social justice. And he says, economically, I'm not very partisan, right? Like I'm kind of that's he was much more he was admittedly a centrist in a lot of ways. And so when you hear him kind of doing his anti-corporate shtick now, I think most people just don't believe it. Like it sounds weird coming out of his mouth. And so I think there are a lot of kind of longer term issues with this party, and they need to figure out and use this opportunity, I think, to figure out who they are, what they believe, and what kind of contribution they can make in Canada in this new environment.
Yeah, and I've noticed, especially over the past 4 years, and especially after the supply and confidence agreement was signed, the NDP has been quite rudderless. Like it's unclear what exactly they stand for. Historically, you go back to the 70s and the 80s. The NDP, um, with various nuances depending on who the leader it was and what specific period we're talking about, were the party of conscience, right? That was their brand, and that it was not so much to win elections, which really became the focus under Leighton, to actually become the party in power, but to influence the terms of debate and reduce the liberals to a minority and use their um, influence within parliament to push the liberals to implement certain policies that they wouldn't have otherwise, right? Like
And
things
to
like
be
creating
fair
a
to
capital
them,
punishment.
though, I mean, isn't that what they did here, right? I mean, that's the
Well,
trap they've fallen into. Is they got major things out of the liberals with the supply and confidence agreement, right?
right, and you saw, I interviewed Avi Lewis recently, who's running for the NDP in Vancouver Centre.
Mhm.
His father was the leader of the Ontario NDP. His grandfather was the leader of the federal NDP, and yeah, I mean, he was, and I, of course, asked him about the NDP's poll numbers, which weren't as
Hmm.
bad then as they are now, and he was frustrated that they're not resonating. Like he believes they should be, but he pointed out also, like 72 to 74, right, there was liberal minority. um, NDP exerted influence on it, created
Hmm.
Petro Canada, um, um, and did various other social democratic policies. And then in the 74 election, they were wiped out,
Yep.
right? And then Trudeau had a majority again. You see that often. I mean, again, neither case was it a coalition, like Polyev says, right? It was, how Westminster politics works in a minority government, right? You concede on some points to get support from another party or other parties to get your agenda on the table. Um, but it almost always happens that the stronger
Mhm.
party gets to take credit for the things people like in the minority parliament, and the junior partner gets blamed for everything that goes wrong. And I
Yeah,
don't, but
that's always the case, right? I mean, look at the Lib Dems in their coalition government with David Cameron. I mean, junior partners basically sign up to get wiped out. If you're doing that, you're making a trade. You get closer to power, you get some of your agenda done, but you're not going to come out well, more than likely, because you are going to get blamed. You're going to get tagged with association. You can't oppose when you're on the inside, and the supply and confidence agreement has made it quite difficult for the NDP to do that. Of course, I mean, it's funny because the Conservatives, in many ways, have been the authors of their own demise on this by attacking the NDP so vociferously. And I think a lot of their critiques have resonated with Canadians, and yet they need the NDP to do better if they want to win. Jordan,
yeah,
what are
well,
your thoughts on any of this?
I mean, something that you said kind of like you kind of mentioned that like one of the things that you see them doing a bit right now is sort of like positioning themselves as like guardians of the social safety net, which is like definitely something I've seen like a lot happening this week. Like that's clearly like Jagmeet has kind of dropped sort of the like I'm running for PM stuff, and now he's leaning into more of this stuff, which I honestly thought was it's basically the only move I can think of that they might have
Yeah.
left in their kind of toolkit right now. So like while I totally agree with you that like yes, it's like economic policies and things like that the NDP should be working on, I don't see that coming from this iteration
No.
of the NDP in any way that's going to make a difference. So I do actually think that like what else are you going to do? You have to kind of position yourself as the guardians of the social safety net, and I think one way that they're doing that this week more than they have been before is around the dental stuff. I think that's kind of
Mhm.
smart. Like take ownership of that. It's great. Most people in my life talked about this. Like, this is something people are excited about. It's, you know, it's going to be a big deal for a lot of people, and it's something a lot of people have wanted for a long time, and it's exactly the kind of thing that you want the NDP to be doing when you have a liberal minority, is like making these sorts of things happen. So like that's a good one. But yeah, I mean, when it comes to like how like I don't really think that there's much else that they can do otherwise to sort of turn things around between now and then. It sort of has to be about hanging on to some of these seats, these, like, you know, that they might be able to get, you know, whether it's sort of like on the ground battling it out or what have you. I mean, I'm not totally convinced that it'll be as like, I know it's going to be a bad showing for them for sure, but I don't know if it's going to be as devastating, you know, because I'm from Ontario, where we just kind of saw very pessimistic projections around the seat count for our NDP here, and they did better than expected. So, you know, um, political winds are want to change. We'll see.
And I
Yeah.
do think Carney's opened up so much room on the left. He's basically running as a red Tory. And
Yeah.
so there is a lot of space there. But I will say, I think people are caught up in the moment. A lot of people that I know in my life who are left of the NDP are strangely very excited for Mark Carney, the central banker. I find it a very interesting phenomenon. People's excitement, enthusiasm, attachment to a man who's very much a cipher, I think, still, who I think his kind of lack of personal flair has translated into a kind of seriousness which people are really craving right now. And I do think the one thing that you can't say about Jagmeet Singh is that he comes off as serious. I mean, he talks like a Brampton bro, right? Like that's, and that has its uses, right?
Oh yeah, I kind
But
of love the way he talks.
yeah, and like it's much more like a real person. But Canadians don't want somebody who talks like a real person right now. They want somebody who talks bankerese.
You
Yeah.
know,
And
I've
if
heard you talk about. Oh, go ahead, Jeremy.
no, you go ahead, Jordan.
Sure. I mean, I've heard you talk about sort of like people who lean left who are like Carney curious, I think was
Mhm.
how you kind of
Yeah.
put it before. And it's super interesting because it does seem like there's a lot of that happening. People who would typically vote for the NDP are now voting for, or maybe voting for Carney, who is like so not typical to that type of voter, right? Like he's like kind of like the perfect businessman. He's like the central banker. It's just like a little interesting. But I do feel like one thing that I'm not sure if this is like a smart or strong connection here, but I've been thinking about the 1993 election, which was the last really bad showing for the NDP. It was the, you know, kind of worst of the worst for them. And sort of what happened next was, and like, of course, it's a bit of a different scenario. The PCs collapsed as well. There was a lot going on. But what happened next was you got kind of, you know, a decade of liberal majorities and then a liberal minority. So I don't know. It might be something worth thinking about for voters who kind of like hold some of these like left issues to their close to their chests, because you know, it took a long time for the other parties to build themselves back up, basically after that election. So is that kind of what we're headed to here with the NDP? I don't know, but it wasn't a good time last time.
Yeah, and that those liberal governments, of course, implemented some of the worst
Yeah.
austerity that Canada's ever seen. And you know, at a time when the NDP would have been helpful to have been around to defend public services, mind you, in the provinces they were doing similar things where they're in power. They were beginning this. I mean, not beginning, because it really, the sort of pivot to the center, I mean, really began when Ed Broadbent defeated Rosemary Brown, I believe her name was. I'm sorry if I got that wrong, in the leadership race after David Lewis, who and Brown was calling for the NDP to be this bold, unabashedly left wing force. And Broadbent was saying, no, 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 we need to meet people where they're at. We need to accept reality, while also, you know, being this party of conscience. And you know, we saw under Leighton, and then especially under Mulcair, this pivot to the center, where in 2015 they were running to the right of the Liberals on key issues that people were
Prairie
talking about.
populism.
Yeah, yeah, and then you get Jagmeet, and Jagmeet and his strategy, it seems to me, not just over the past 4 years, but really over the past 8 years that he's been leader, has been to position the NDP ever so slightly to the left of the Liberals, right? And it hasn't worked because, there hasn't been that clear of a difference between uh, the New Democrats and the Liberals. And you look at the policies that the NDP are coming out with, a lot of them are really reflective of that, I think. Just, again, just occupying space just ever so slightly to the left of liberals, just keeping it safe, keeping it within the terms of mainstream debate. If you look at their income tax cut plan, they attacked the liberal and conservative plans as being, this sort of tax cut for the wealthy disguised as a tax cut for the, lowest income bracket. Um, but then the NDP releases its own, and in the past couple elections, again, always came off as half-hearted, as you noted, Archie. But Jagmeet was saying we need to have a wealth tax, we need to tax the rich, and now it's like, well, we're gonna raise the basic personal exemption for people who make under 170K, lower it for people who make over, and then cut taxes for people in like the middle. And it's just like at that point it's just so convoluted, right? And it's not, there's no bold messaging. But I do also like, well, I think we agree that the NDP has been in large part the author of its own demise. I do think also there are some circumstances that are beyond their control, like uh, um, you know the threat from the United States, which has become the defining issue of the election. And people are looking for stability. They're looking for someone who is like safe, that they can just trust to be a competent manager. And, Mark Carney appears to be that guy. Um,
And
but
I think a big problem with that, though, is because the NDP has not spent a lot of their time intellectually thinking about larger economic issues and structures, because in some ways they've moved away from being a true labor party that's rooted in unions and organized labor, around and surrounding itself with people who do spend a lot of time on these kinds of issues of trade, of industrial policy, of competition, etc. They haven't been prepared for this kind of turn. You can imagine a different scenario under a different kind of, say, NDP, that had been seriously thinking about kind of where Canada stands in kind of global trade, of hollowing out of industry, of kind of workers' rights, in both domestic kind of and international contexts, of where Canada should be kind of making its economic bets, of how the state can facilitate these kinds of things. Um, you can imagine that sort of a party doing actually quite well right now. But people, I think, do not believe that this NDP has that kind of intellectual rigor when it comes to these issues. We did an interview with Laurent Carbonneau the other week. He's in old NDP, former NDP staffer. He was in the leader's office, policy or issues manager, I think. But he's now. Oh, I can't exactly remember where, but he had a great book called "At the Trough" about the rise and rise of Canada's corporate welfare bums. And of course, even the phrase "corporate welfare bums" that's from Lewis in the
mhm.
1970s, right? And you can even just see, like, it's obviously a catchy slogan, but that slogan emerged out of a kind of deep thinking about the kind of corporate capitalism, and that we built in Canada during that time. So yeah, I just think, like, yes, the American threat, all of that is essential to understand this moment, but it's partially because it's caught the NDP flat-footed, because, like, they just, I don't know, they don't. like spend time thinking about this stuff. You know, you like it. I don't know. That's my kind of 2 cents on it.
Yeah, what do you think, Jordan?
I mean, I don't think I'll bore you with agreeing with Arshy because I helped work on that Carbonneau episode, and I think most of what you said there is kind of where I stand on a lot of this too. I mean, I think yeah, like we know that we're at sort of an end of a road here, so I kind of just concur with what you're saying. Is like we just need to this party, if it wants to be taken seriously and rise to moments like this, has to have these sort of like economic policy, industrial policy, what have you, that allows us to treat them that way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
I do want to jump in and say one
yeah.
other thing. You were kind of mentioning, Mulcair into Singh. You know, I find it kind of funny that I think um, when Stephen Harper was in power, the NDP goes out and gets their own Stephen Harper, Tom Mulcair, who very very feels a lot Harperish, like very kind of serious, stern. This kind of like figure. They can even kind of look alike in some ways, like similar scowls. After Trudeau, they go out and get their own Trudeau, somebody who can do the social media thing, who's like shiny and a bubbly personality and like all of that kind of thing, but a little bit of an airhead, right? Just like Trudeau. And ironically, I think what they've needed all along is a Polyev. What the NDP really does need is a Pierre Polyev for the left, somebody who can bring the country to their way of thinking through just like energy and determination and grit, and who can appeal to the base and like instill like actual kind of loyalty and enthusiasm. I mean, what Pierre Polyev has been able to do on the carbon tax issue has been nothing short of incredible in some ways. Like this, he was able to basically get everybody on board, even though the government is literally sending people checks every few months. You get money in the bank, and people are madder than ever about this carbon tax. And I think that speaks to the fact that Polyev has made very effective arguments about how this might, how this affects all kinds of sectors of the economy that are not necessarily obvious on their face. I disagree with a lot of them in some ways, but at the same time, he has brought other political parties and huge numbers of Canadians to his way of thinking. That's the kind of leader that the NDP needs.
Yeah, exactly. That's a very important point. That Polyev has shifted the contours of debate in Canadian politics
Mhm.
in his direction. And so even if he loses, he still wins in that sense, that the terrain has shifted rightwards. Whereas if the NDP gets wiped out, they get wiped out. I mean, they did have accomplishments, particularly in the most recent parliament, that the Liberals are getting all the credit for. But I mean, that's it. That's a short term solution. And yes, of course, people are getting dental care that didn't have it before. Um, People are getting access to diabetes, or will be getting access to diabetes and contraceptive medications for free. Um, Federally regulated employers can't hire scabs. I mean, these are significant accomplishments, but um, it is still, it's a short term gain. And, long term, I think it's unclear, what the fate of the NDP is, and I want to talk about that in a moment. But I wanted to bring up a specific NDP policy I saw the other day, and I was just like, "What?" And that's do you hear about the victory bonds
Yeah.
that Singh is proposing? Okay, so Jordan, this is wild to me. So to fight tariffs, Singh is proposing bringing back victory bonds like we had during the First
Like
and
four
Second World War.
times.
Yeah.
Yeah. right? And again, the name is
Oh
explicitly
god, more
evoking
dispatches
nostalgia.
from the dystopia, eh? Like I don't want to hear this, Jeremy. At least tell me. Sorry, I'm just being a jerk.
Well, yeah, no, I mean it's funny, all these, I mean, people don't know what to do with tariffs, and I saw, a post that was like, 3 TikTok dances to fight tariffs that, I thought was very much a sign of the times.
Oh, they're dancing about it. Well, then it's gonna be sorted soon.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I think it's like self care, that sure
Gotcha.
you may not be able to afford anything, but but yeah, so saying
Yeah,
that
what is
lots
the
of
thinking behind victory bonds? I like what
yeah,
purpose
so
are they
it's
supposed to
that
serve
so
here?
so the victory bonds during the wars were for individuals, companies, other organizations to purchase, right?
Yeah, to
Bonds
fund
at
the government war effort.
yeah, to fund the government war effort, and then they would get the money back with interest after a fixed period of time. So Singh is doing that, but it's only for individuals to purchase, which they can deduct from their payroll, or can get deducted from their payroll, I guess, because most people don't have control over their payrolls, which could be something that the NDP would highlight, but alas. And that those funds will be used to build infrastructure, public infrastructure that the NDP emphasizes will be
Mm-hmm.
publicly owned. And it's just like, what are we doing here? Can't there was a Canadian savings bonds program that ended in 2017, actually, the year Jagmeet Singh became NDP leader, because there just wasn't interest in it. And now, of course, I suspect there would be more interest in something like that now that we are facing this existential threat. But I mean, talk about not meeting the moment. I mean, Glenn
Yeah.
in the chat says quite aptly, it's an individual solution to a collective problem. And why is the NDP offering that?
And
I
is it
find
a
it so
problem
odd.
right now with the federal government that they don't have enough fiscal firepower? Like, I don't think that is the issue, really, right? I mean, when the CD Howe and whatnot were reorienting the entire Canadian economy to meet the moment of World War II, I mean, like that was the biggest kind of imaginable economic buildup in a country that had up till that point still largely been reliant on trade with the British Empire, was still very much mostly agricultural, not very urbanized, was lacking in a lot of industries from, say, the Second Industrial Revolution. Like, you needed that money. Like, I don't. This isn't something to that scale. And if Singh is saying it is, but then like on what? Just public infrastructure? Like, how is that going to help us necessarily fight this economic threat from the U.S. if we have our slightly better roads and bridges? Public infrastructure is incredibly important, but I don't see that as solving the problem at hand. I get what he's doing here, but like this is what I'm talking about, and I this is exactly I think why you brought this up. It's a press release. Like there, it sounds good for that day. And this has been consistently the biggest problem with the Trudeau government as well is government by press release. What will make for a good headline that day? The NDP should not be playing that game. They should be thoughtful, take the time to actually understand things, have a kind of more fulsome critique of what is happening. Again, I will say, I do think Poilievre's critique, whether you believe it or not, is coherent. The NDP's critiques of what's like not working in Canada is rarely coherent in the same way.
Yeah, and I mean, if this is a threat on par with the Second World War or First World War, why aren't we now? Why aren't you advocating nationalizing industry? I mean, again, that if you go back and read David Lewis's book he co-authored with I forget who, "Make This Your Canada," which was I believe still in the days of the CCF, if I'm not mistaken. But it was saying, look, during the war, we were able to nationalize major businesses and come together collectively and be able to essentially exert democratic control over the economy to fight a war. We can do this in times of peace also to provide for people. And I mean, again, that is such this victory bonus proposal is such, I think, a potent symbol of this failure of the NDP to live up to its foundations and meet the moment in the way that the CCF and then the NDP did, after the war, before neoliberalism was ushered in. And
Yeah, I mean, it is just fascinating because we're one of the few Western countries with that's never had a kind of labor government at a federal level, right? Like this is Canada is exceptional in that way. Like Australia, a much more right wing country, has had left wing governments in power through the labor government. You can even think back to Gough Whitlam or someone in the 1970s, but in some ways, I do wonder if we maybe do give too much credit to the NDPs of the past, for being a kind of like social like, sorry, you didn't win either, right? Like their failures in some ways, to actually build a coherent workers movement over a much longer period of time. I think, we shouldn't give the leaders of the past, I think, glorify them necessarily too much, because while I still in some ways kind of yearn for their critiques and their what I see as a much more serious way of kind of doing left-wing politics, they still weren't ever able to get over that hump, and in fact were very very unsuccessful in a lot of ways. So I don't know, it's kind of depressing, if you're somebody like me who does think that a labor party, a workers party, a kind of socialist party, is necessary in Western democracies, to see the history of Canada and just see like how rare it's been that the NDP has been truly relevant.
mm-hmm. It's mainly been in situations of liberal minority governments, and I think Pierre Elliott,
Mm-hmm.
for all his flaws, because of the time he governed in, did have some social democratic instincts. And when he had a minority government, these were pushed by the NDP. Same with Pearson, and so I mean, Canada's never had a Labor government, but our Liberal government has sort of played from that playbook when it was something that would win them elections, right? I mean, our Liberals are like the Democrats in the States, where it's like whatever way the wind blows, they'll blow in that direction. And
Oh
also,
yeah.
a lot of these Labor governments, I'm thinking of the UK in particular. I mean, when it came to the 90s, I mean, they were, as full throated in
Oh
their
yeah.
embrace of neoliberalism as the Liberals here, right? Or
I mean,
as
you
Bill
can't
Clinton.
like third way liberal or third way labor stuff, and liberalism barely counts like that. Yeah, like you said, it's not so dissimilar to what came before it.
But yeah, I mean, we also have this interesting dynamic, whereas the NDP is like facing a wipeout on the federal level, but in the provinces, like especially in the Western provinces, they've essentially supplanted the Liberals as the non-conservative option, and I think have governed accordingly. I mean, thinking about the Alberta NDP, which I mean, I think in some ways did govern as you would expect an NDP government to, in terms of updating the labor code. Again, they did order some striking workers back to work, or didn't stop the employer from doing so. They did give public sector unions zeros. Like, I don't want to whitewash the Alberta NDP's record, but then on like stuff like fossil fuels, I mean, they were to the right of the federal Liberals, and I mean, you see that in many ways with the BC NDP, which I mean, I think in the 70s they actually had a left wing government, right?
Dave Barrett. We're here for a good time, not for a long time.
Right. And what happened to that spirit? I think that is something that, again, not to be too nostalgic of the NDP past, but where is that spirit of let's build, and you see it also like with Sean Orr, who I know isn't necessarily a New Democrat, being elected to Vancouver City Council. That's just like, let's just do this. And I think that's something conservatives are so good at. Once they get to power, just moving at lightning speed to make as many long-lasting changes as they can.
And I think conservatives are also quite good at making changes that will then help cement their power base and are quite explicit about that, right? Like if I was the leader of the NDP in a situation where I had like, a supply and confidence agreement with the Liberals, like one of the first things I would do would basically be do every single thing possible to make unionization easier, right? Like you need to start rebuilding up the labor movement and bring back a lot of larger unions, make them into the more political institutions that they used to be in the past, and tie them more closely to your party in ways, because a lot of them support liberals and now even conservatives, right? I mean,
Yeah.
that's a shocking development when you have union leaders and unions endorsing conservative candidates. You've seen it with Doug Ford, and now you're seeing it with Pierre Poilievre. And so with the NDP, like they need to do things to both change the kind of political environment, make organizing easier, make unions stronger, make the institutions that should be the backbone of a labor party stronger, and change the information environment too. Like I would be both pushing for reform of the CBC, but also giving them a fuck ton more money, to like do a lot more news and get better at it, because I think a more informed electorate is a benefit for a party like the NDP. But then also, make sure that like journalism exists, because I promise you, in the information environment that we live in today, with large social media platforms that are governed by right-wing oligarchs, if and with AI kind of coming, all this stuff, like it's not going to be to the benefit of the left in any way, shape, or form, right? Like it is very much to the right. So you have to make those kinds of changes that will help you not just get elected, but help your cause basically be, again, stronger, more coherent, more powerful. And yeah, and the same thing you mentioned, Dave Barrett. If you get into office, like I would give that speech, the Dave Barrett speech. Like, look, we're just going to do our things. They're probably going to kick us out after 4 years, because that's what always happens. But we're going to change this place for the better in the meantime. So this is a short-term stint. Don't expect to be an MP or MLA for the next 16 years, right?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the good things that the Alberta NDP did were just immediately rolled back by Jason Kenney, right? Because Kenney, better than many politicians, understood that you've got to operate at lightning speed. So he had the summer of repeal, where he rolled back nearly everything that the Alberta NDP did, and it's interesting, Arshy, you mentioned the CBC. Carney's the one who's advocating that now. And Singh was just like, well, yeah, I think we should strengthen the CBC too. And it's like, okay, great. So if people are concerned about the fate of the CBC, why should they vote for you and not Carney? And maybe they're developing some platform plank that
I'm sure it will be slightly to the left of Mark Carney, just like everything else,
just
right?
like lacks imagination, right? Like they should be
Exactly.
kind of swinging for the fences in this moment, and I don't understand why they're not. It just seems like, even to go back to like sort of the victory bonds thing, it's like, why do you always pick the weirdest possible option? It's so odd. Like this week, like one of the things that I've been thinking about a little bit, it's kind of in this vein. Oh, hello.
This is Gotham.
Hi, Kitty.
Yeah, I don't normally record out here in the living room, so
this is very exciting to me. I wish I had cats. Okay, but yeah, what I was thinking about is Another place where I feel like they've like really unimpressed, like, or disappointed me, been unimpressive, is sort of like this new talking point that you see both from Jugmeat but also from Pierre on kind of like closing the tax haven loopholes. This is something that NDP could be taking so much further. You know, Canada has these treaties with these countries like Barbuda, like Bermuda, like Barbados, where, you know, on day one, a leader could just pull the plug on those treaties and those, you know, tax haven options. And like any party leader could start talking about that right now. I haven't seen anybody say that. You know, I haven't seen anyone say that they're going to get like pull the treaties and like that's what they're going to do. Jugmeat could go even further. He could say, you know, not only is he going to get, would he like say get rid of them, he could put pressure on Pierre too. But conservative governments are the governments that brought these in. You know, it was Harper and Joe
And
Clark,
liberals as well.
and liberals as well.
Yeah.
But like, you know, like there's lots of ways that we could be talking about this in a much more to just push it further. And I, you know, it's basically the NDP and the Conservatives are saying the same things, you know? And I think at one point, even Jugmeat said that, like, he would close the loopholes except for legitimate business. Well, I mean, this isn't illegal, right?
Yeah,
like, tax havens are
exactly.
legal, so it's all legitimate business. So,
Right.
like,
That's
you
the
know,
point.
it was deeply frustrating for me to hear that, because it's like, we need to actually reframe what we describe as legitimate business, because there's nothing wrong with doing that. And that's Carney's point as well, is that, like, no, like, I know what I'm doing and this is smart businessman stuff. And like, you cannot have that exception. You should say you're going to yank them, and here's the amount of money that will now be paid in taxes in Canada. And I think that would be pretty effective.
Yeah, you go back to the CBC. You know what I would pitch? CBC2, an entirely distinct media organization that competes with the CBC. Because I think one of the problems some Canadians have with the CBC is it feels too monolithic, right? All right, so we got different public sector competitors here. You know, there's probably a whole host of things wrong with that, but at least it's bold, like not
Well,
just slightly
in
more funding to the
Germany,
CBC.
Bold,
I
yeah.
mean, Carney, you know, I mean, I'm not a Carney fan by any stretch of the imagination, but I thought his proposal for the CBC was great. And one of the things he said is we need to fund it like European countries fund
Yes.
their public broadcasters, right? The BBC, France Television. But you know what you said remind me, in Germany they don't have a single public broadcaster. They have like a sort of an umbrella that funds many different public broadcasters. And I think Arshy, I think that's a great idea. Maybe you should run for the leadership of the NDP.
I will be very bad at politics. I'm not good at message discipline or, you know, going along with leaders, any of that. So you don't expect to see me on a ballot anytime soon. But I will yell at the from the sidelines quite a bit.
Yeah,
Do we want to
that's
talk about any either specific ridings or in this election or any specific candidates? Obviously, there's almost certainly going to be a leadership race after this. Like, what does the next little while look like for the NDP? What should
yeah.
people be watching out
Well,
for?
I guess we can talk a bit about some ridings. I'm in Edmonton Griesbach. I have an NDP incumbent, Blake Desjardins. I, full disclosure, think he's great. I'm going to vote for him. You know, he's up against a uniquely odious conservative, in my view, Kerry Diot, who he defeated in 2021. And now Diot is sensing opportunity. And again, a lot of, you know, supporters of liberals. And I think, again, a lot of people who have historically supported the New Democrats are seeing this election as we noted from the outset, it's between liberals or conservatives, and so any vote that isn't for the liberals is wasted. And that is, you know, vast oversimplification when you look from riding to riding. Yeah, in most ridings, the strategic vote against conservatives is liberals. But if you live in a safe conservative seat, or if you live in a safe liberal seat, it doesn't matter. And there are ridings where you know, the New Democrat is the strongest opponent against conservatives, like my own, or in Elizabeth May's riding where it's the Greens, or Mike Morrison's riding where it's also the Greens, and you know, a bunch of block ridings. And so I think that's been problematic. I think I actually just interviewed Blake this earlier this afternoon, and he seems quite confident that he's going to win in that just at the doors, people are not hearing from anyone else. I mean, the Liberals just announced a candidate at like the last minute who no one's heard of. And But I mean, again, it's looking like, and again, also these aggregators like 338, like again, what they do on a national level is helpful. I think in aggregating and weighting different polls to get a sense of what of a bigger picture now. But on a riding to riding basis, and same with all these strategic voting websites, it is a total crapshoot because they're taking federal data, which there's lots of, and extrapolating it onto a local level, which based on past election results, which is a very flawed methodology. Um, and and yeah, but I mean, it's looking like I mean, the NDP, they're not going to gain any seats, right? They're not. No, I don't think any new Democrats are getting elected in this election unless something radically changes in the next 2 odd weeks. It's about holding on to what they have, and Heather McPherson, who was my MP until I got redistricted into Blake's riding. Her seat is safe. Actually, the safest in Canada is
I
in
think Edmonton is a bit of a different story, though. You know what I mean? Like when it comes
yeah.
to the NDP, this might be the most NDP city in Canada. It's probably Edmonton, right?
Yeah, it's interesting because Edmonton Center was looking to be a three-way race when Randy Boissonneau was the Liberal candidate, but then they dropped him, put in like a long-time Liberal Party functionary, and again, all these strategic voting websites are now like, oh, the Liberals are the safe bet. I mean, the NDP recruited Trisha Estabrooks, who used to be a journalist at CBC and then was on the Edmonton Public School Board more recently. And she's been campaigning hard and a lot. And she got endorsed by Rachel Notley, which in Edmonton goes a long way.
But
But yeah,
I mean, but like again, I think Edmonton might be a little bit of an exception. Outside of Edmonton, the ridings that I can see the NDP really holding on to, Hamilton with Matthew Green, quite possibly. I think Windsor's looking pretty bad for them, which is, historically been a decent place for the NDP. Maybe Vancouver East, like, if anything is going to stay NDP, that seems quite likely. But at the same time, you look at those poll numbers, this is devastating. We're in
Mhm.
territory. Like, I don't think it's necessarily just about strategic voting, right? What I see when I talk to people is they want seriousness in this moment. They're willing to tolerate for this election, electing like a business monster as long as it's our business monster. Because they see Mark Carney as somebody who is comfortable on international stages, somebody who is part of the Davos elite, and that's a benefit. The things that would normally be drawbacks, I think, even to left wing voters, are now being highlighted as a benefit. And so I'm sure some people. I do think there is a lot of people who genuinely dislike Pierre Polyev, and I think his kind of vicious style of politics has done a good job of scaring voters on the left to voting liberal, in a way where it actually feels believable this time. Like, no, Aaron O'Toole was like a fairly moderate conservative, and the liberals were able to kind of plaster him as like a Nazi. Like, it was pretty impressive actually, and you had a lot of NDP voters doing the same dance back then, voting for Trudeau to keep out radical conservative Aaron O'Toole, which I never found particularly believable, but a lot of people did. But with Polyev, like, you don't have to make anything up. Like, he is just quite to the right. But so I think that is part of the dynamic. But I do think the America thing is just better, is more of it. That the liberals picked like the perfect person for this kind of a moment, especially if we don't ask him too many questions. You know what I mean? Like if Mark
Mhm.
Carney just never didn't give a speech for the rest of the campaign, didn't show up at the debates, I think he would still win. Like people just like the idea of that guy.
Well, there's a
Mhm.
reason he called the election as quickly as he
Yes.
did, because again, I mean,
Yeah.
the tariffs, and I mean, he's being open about it too. Like we're gonna have
Yeah.
a recession, and the longer he waited for an election for those economic impacts to be felt, the more it would empower Polyev to do the same old song and dance he's been doing for the past 3 years and has barely changed. Um, and I mean, Danielle Smith certainly hasn't helped him with her interventions in the Canada-U.S. relations file and like explicitly saying like, yeah, Polyev is, has a lot in common with Trump, and that's a good thing. But yeah, I mean, a lot of I think good New Democrat MPs are gonna lose their seats. I mean, Nikki Ashton might be losing hers, who I think has been a very valuable voice, often in the wilderness, not as much now on matters of foreign affairs. Um, I think Alexander Boulerice is quite safe in considering
Yes.
that he's the one orange wave guy who's still around. I think he's built like a solid base of support
And
in
probably
the.
a pretty strong leadership contender, I imagine, this time
Mhm.
around, right?
Yeah, I hadn't thought of that. But Leah Gazan, also Winnipeg MP, she could lose her seat, and I think she's been really great, particularly on Indigenous issues. But yeah, speaking of potential leadership contenders, you guys are serious journalists. People talk to you, you hear things. Who other than Boulerice have you been hearing as potential NDP leadership candidates?
Oh,
If
I have no inside sources in the NDP, but I'm happy to speculate myself. Like I think Boulerice, I think Matthew Green, possibly he's kind of denied having interest in this, but I think I've seen some enthusiasm for him, his particular styles of communication, and I do think he comes off fairly serious, which again that should be in some ways the metric the NDP is kind of looking for. If Ashton loses her seat, like she's run what twice now, but I can't imagine she'll give it a third kick if
I only
she's right. But then yeah, like you start running out of names pretty quick. Like Charlie Angus isn't going to be running. He came in second, and I think strangely is like become very like a resistance icon right now, which is kind of a fascinating turn for Charlie. But again, like he actually I think would have been if he did run, I think he would win like with a big majority in the leadership race right now. But he's in his mid 60s. He says he's done with politics. He's not going to have a seat. So I
fellow
guess he's out.
Substacker, really
But
Angus.
pardon.
Fellow Substacker.
That's right. He is a fellow Substacker. Well, I mean, why would Wob? I see somebody in the comments saying Wob Canoe. Why would he leave his job right now? I mean, he's one of the most popular premiers in the country. He gets to actually run a government. I don't think Wob Canoe, David Eby are going to have any interest in this because they're much more powerful than you know, running a tiny federal caucus. Maybe Nathan Cullen will give it a go again. I
Haven't heard
think,
that name in a while.
yeah. I don't know. I've seen his name just like he wrote something recently in the National Post just about how Tom Mulcair is wrong and we do need an NDP. That felt to me a little bit like maybe re-entering his name into the discussion.
Mm.
But what I would like to see is somebody from the outside. I don't see anybody who really fits the bill for me here in any of the caucuses,
Yeah, you
basically.
stole my answer, Arshy.
Yeah, but like I would like to see maybe a union leader, but specifically a private sector union leader. That's what I would like. Somebody who's actually been like fighting the fights, having to be on the ground, putting up with the horrible organizing environments that exist in the private sector. Somebody who knows how to do that kind of work, because this is an organizing job as far as I can see. And to me, the fundamental problem with the NDP continues to be their lack of connection. Oh my God, no! Don't even
Sorry.
joke about Jian
Glenn.
Ghomeshi rejection. Terrible.
Well,
But the fundamental
isn't
problem
he
with,
working for some like Iranian
yeah,
broadcaster now?
basically, yeah, he's doing his same shtick, but for a Persian audience. Um, but yeah, the fundamental problem with the NDP continues to be the deterioration of both the labor movement and their relationship with the labor movement. That's the fundamental problem that needs to be fixed. And so, somebody, I think, especially from private sector labor, might make for a good fit there. That's kind of what I would hope to see, or at least a candidate in the race who can talk who
I
comes
mean,
from that background, even if they don't necessarily win, right?
you totally stole my answer, which was going to be an outsider.
Yeah.
And you also named every other viable candidate, so I'm not sure what you're hoping for me to do here. But yeah, so you basically kind of nailed that there. But if I could make a prediction, that'll be based on what you said earlier, which is that the NDP have kind of fallen into a bit of a habit where they get sort of a leader who mimics the last successful leader. So Mulcair and Harper and Trudeau and Singh. So I'm looking forward to NDP foreign central banker,
Yeah.
because I
I
guess
mean,
that's what's coming.
I will say one of the problems I think with the NDP at times is a lot of their brain trust nowadays is coming from the big pension funds, right? Like their economic minds are people who make their boots in the union pension funds and that kind of a world. And like I don't think they should be looking there. That's not a good place, but I wouldn't actually be surprised if you see somebody like that kind of come out of the woodwork.
Someone in the chat said Rachel Notley. I've heard that speculated a bunch. David Clayman Haga wrote an article speculating about that like a year ago or maybe even 2 years ago. I think Notley, from what I understand, is done with politics. She's back in law. Also, I don't think she would be a good federal NDP leader. I really don't. I think again, and a lot of the
Too many
predictions.
splits, like especially on energy, would be hard,
Yeah, it
very
would be
hard.
bad. I mean, we need an NDP that is firmly saying we need to phase out the tar sands. Like, sorry, I know a lot of people in Alberta don't want to hear that, but it's got to happen. I mean, Carney, when he was working for the UN, was quite clear that he thinks that. And so, someone like Notley, who again spent her entire years in power and as official opposition, clinging to this idea that we can continue expanding the tar sands, I think would be quite a bad pick. Heather McPherson, however, it's been speculated that she is preparing a run. I know Chelsea Nash at the Hill Times sat down with her for an interview last year. And McPherson was saying that she thinks the next leader of the NDP should be a woman. And Chelsea asked her, um, um, is that woman you? And she laughed and said, no, my French isn't good enough. And then Chelsea asked, well, are you
Taking French
working on
lessons.
your
Yeah.
French? And she said, yeah. So I think that, and I asked Heather about that. I saw her at the Parkland Institute conference later last year, and I kind of asked her about that, and she was like, "Oh no, I wasn't talking about myself. I hear Valerie Plante might, be interested in,
Okay,
joining
that
federal
would be
politics."
interesting.
Yeah, I mean, it would. She's an outsider, right? I mean,
Mhm.
her.
She's run a government and quite successfully, as far as I can tell. Right?
Yeah, I mean, I think it would be. She would be an interesting candidate. I don't
Yeah.
know if she would be the best choice. So I
I
honestly
mean, yeah.
don't know that much about her politics. I know in Montreal, like the police get to like essentially unilaterally declare their own budget, even
Oh,
more.
unlike every other police force in the country, huh?
Well,
Like who
well,
are governed by effectively by civilian authorities. Yeah.
yeah. I mean, not unusual, but I think the extent to which it is. I know at Concordia, Ted Rutland had a study that was talking about defunding the police and how like no municipality in Canada actually did that.
Yeah. Yes.
Um, and Montreal was like the worst example where they increased police funding by the most, and Edmonton did it by the least, but they still increased it, right? And
Yeah.
the police union will never forgive City Hall for doing that.
I
Um,
do want to maybe just jump in. You know, you mentioned Heather McPherson joking that the next or saying that the next NDP leader should be a woman. And you know, I think the NDP needs to get out of this way of framing issues. Like, I'm sorry, but the debates need to be about economic policies, about like serious political things, and that is how you're going to attract, I think, like non-white voters, female voters, like people at this point I don't think want to be pandered to, and the social justice aspects should come as a given if you're in the NDP. That's not what should be centered in the debates, I think. You know what I mean? Like, that should just be like, that's the baseline, and now let's have our fights for like the different visions for what a kind of Canadian economy or approach to labor, all those kinds of foreign policy kind of operate. I think in the Singh era, it's gotten way too just, you know, like identity politics focused.
yeah,
And I don't think like that doesn't appeal to voters, right? Like, it appeals to white voters more than it appeals to non-white voters. I'll tell you that. Like, there's not a lot of Punjabi people that are voting for the NDP, despite having a visible, you know, Sikh leader who actually is quite good on Sikh issues, Sikh specific issues. Like, he has not been able to translate that into support there. And so I think framing these issues in a different way is essential for a political party to thrive in this moment. And it also, like, it just feels less, I don't know, like pandering or like bullshit to me, right? Like, again, the social justice stuff should be a given. I don't want to see, if in the next NDP leadership debates, like huge big fights about Israel Palestine. It should be a given that if you're in the if that the NDP is a party that's opposed to Israeli apartheid and the war in Gaza. You know what I mean? Like, but if that becomes the kind of central debates, then you don't gain much ground on the other things, and that's where the work needs to be done right now.
yeah, and I do think I agree with you that I think that this superficial identity politics, because on some level all politics are
Oh, of
identity,
course. I mean the
but
kind of, you know,
yeah,
TikTok
like we
kind of shit.
need um, a leader from X identity
Yeah.
category. I mean, this is these ideas are coming from like a consultant class that is so out
Yes,
of
exactly.
touch with
Yeah.
and also like let the conservatives do the identity politics. They're, to be honest, they're better at it. They're more
They're so much
effective.
better at it.
Yeah, and but I will say with Heather, you mentioned
Yeah.
Israel and Palestine, and I think she's shown incredible leadership
Yeah.
on that file, and I think that that would be a huge asset to her in a leadership campaign. I think she erred greatly in watering down that motion to let the Liberals support it, because now I think a lot of people who might be you know voting in part because of the candidates' positions on Palestine are just like, well, the Liberals are pretty much the same as New Democrats. They voted for their motion, right? And I think Heather should have exposed those divisions within the Liberals, um, because it might have even passed with the support of like almost like most of the Liberal backbench and the Bloc and the NDP and the Greens. And I do think that that is coming back to bite her, though, of course, this election isn't being defined by, Israel in Palestine in a way where you could argue the U.S. election was, like, in part. It's just not on the radar. I mean, foreign issues, the only foreign issue people are talking about is Canada-U.S. relations. But I mean, I do like Heather. I think her leadership campaign would be interesting, but she's also like not a socialist, right? Like she doesn't come from that tradition. She's very much, it comes from the NGO world, and you can tell by the way
There's a
she
lot
talks.
of NGO people in NDP politics these days, and I'm telling like those they're not my favorites these days. Like I think a lot of the ways of moving in the world that NGO people bring are just not effective, and like for a party like the NDP. I'm not saying this specifically about Heather McPherson. I'm not very familiar with her at all. I'm saying just I don't like the NGO class. Like labor is the place to be looking, not consulting NGOs, do-goodery in general. I don't think, not today.
Yeah, I agree with. And one other potential candidate
Mm,
who I'm quite certain is going to run is Avi Lewis.
yes,
Um,
Mm.
and I
I
like
think he'll
Avi.
win. Like I think the kind of the moment is right.
I
Sorry,
mean, I like Avi. I like his politics, but
I don't really
if
like
he
him.
can't win a seat,
Yeah,
sorry, what did you say?
I don't really like him. Like,
I
Well,
mean,
we'll
he
see.
has that Lewis
We'll see with
stamp.
his seat, right? That'll be
yeah,
telling.
that exactly. But look, I knew people who worked at his campaign last time, very close, and like they said, barely worked at it, right? Just not like more interested in the other stuff. He's involved in
Mm.
too many things, and I don't like the kind of royal aspect, dynastic aspects here, right? Like I hate that shit. I think it's a bad look for the NDP. I do know, the Leap Manifesto folks. I think are going to be pretty organized next time, and are probably going to rally around Avi. And I do think that wing of the party having a much, much, much bigger say is probably a good thing overall. I just don't. For me, a guy like Avi Lewis isn't the avatar for that.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you. I like him. I like his politics and the politics he represents. But again, if he can't win a seat after a second try, I mean, it's going to be hard to justify making him leader. And also, what you said about dynastic politics, I mean, spot on. What? So, our answer to 10 years of another Trudeau is going to be another Lewis? I mean, come on. I mean, again, and I think the politics he represents could be represented by someone better. Like, I mean, Matthew Green, I think, has pretty
Yeah,
similar politics. Um, um, but yeah, I'm interested to see what outsiders, join the race. I don't know, someone like Lana Payne, you know?
that's definitely a name that I thought about as well. But yeah, like labor leaders like that. Those are the people I want to see coming out of the woodwork. But especially like the effective ones, right? Like people who've organized, people who've fought battles, people who have had to operate in what is a very hostile environment for labor. That's who we should be looking to. Anyways, I do think we have to start cutting this close because we have to go do some journalism at some point.
Yeah, well, I have to go do laundry, but
Yeah.
also journalism.
Yeah. Maybe
No,
last thoughts.
yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, I think that what you're saying about labor, in it needing to play a more prominent role in the NDP than it has in recent years is spot on. But I think it's also important that climate isn't left out of
Yeah.
the discussion.
Yes.
Someone who can balance those concerns about labor and climate and put together this coherent vision. I do like that about Avi and other people
Yeah.
involved with the Leap Manifesto who I think were ahead of their time. I mean, it clearly did influence the Green New Deal movement in the States, which, didn't exactly succeed, but it certainly put important issues on the agenda. I don't know, what's Seapora Berman up to? I'm sure busy with lots of things, but, if she wants to do electoral politics, that's an option. But yeah, no, this has been a great talk, I think. Thanks so much for joining me for
Yeah. So it was a lot of
to
fun.
Thank you
experiment
for
with
having
this
us.
Mhm.
feature. Yeah, and yeah, folks, stay tuned for Arshy and Jordan's series on Brookfield Asset Management. It sounds a lot like the kind of stuff you're doing at commons, which
Very much so. I mean,
Yeah.
like big powerful company in the news that nobody understands. That's basically the thing we're built for. So we'll tell you all the nitty gritty, all the weird little details, and
We read
what it's
all the
really
books,
about.
so you don't have to.
Yep, so many books. All
all
right,
right. Yeah.
great,
Take care. Let's do this again sometime.
absolutely. All right,
For
bye
sure.
everyone.
Bye.